Okay, this is the second video on trig graphs. Now, the first video showed you how we came across the standard graph, which is y equals sin x and y equals cos x, and the tan graph as well. In this video we're going to look at the ones of the form of y equals a sin x and y equals a cos x. Now I could do tan as well, but tan is just the same thing, but they're harder to draw. So I'm just going to concentrate on sine and cosine. Now, what does this a here, what effect does it have on the graph? Well, it turns out that it doesn't matter what function you've got, the a at the front here, a times sin x and a times cos x, it doesn't actually matter the graph that you've got, the a has the same effect in any graph. So, let's start with the basic one. Now the basic one is just sin x. Now sin x, if you watched the graph, or the first video I should say, then it looks like that, and this value here is 1, a positive 1, and the minimum value along here is -1, and that corresponds to, hopefully obviously, a is equal to 1. Now what happens if I change the value of a? If it's not 1, what happens if it's 2 or a half or something like that? Well, this is what happens. I'm going to draw this graph here. I'm going to make it a good bit bigger. Notice that the period is the same. The period of the graph is the same. But I'm going to tell you that this goes up to 2. And the minimum value here is -2. But that tells me that the graph then is y equals 2 sin x. 2 sin x. Okay, I'm going to use the second graph here because that's going to be a bit cluttered. But think about, we're relating it to the black colour there, the original sine graph. So if I make this one smaller, so if I do something like this, something like that, and if I say that that value there's a half, is a height of a half, and minus a half, okay, then the graph for that one would be y equals a half sin x. Okay, so this first graph went up to 2 and -2, and a had a value of 2. The second graph here is went down a wee bit, and it's smaller, it's been squashed if you like. And it goes up to half and -1/2, so a is a half here. And this one, I'm going to draw this one here, I'm going to make it quite big. So I'm going to something like that. I'll try and get the same size on the other side. They're meant to be roughly the same size. And let's say that's 3. This value here is -3. Now look at the graph this time compared to the normal sine graph. This is a standard one. Look what's happened here. It's actually going that way. It's been flipped. In the x-axis. It's been flipped over. And the value is 3 and -3. So the maximum value is 3, minimum value is -3. Well, the equation for that one is y equals -3 sin x. Okay. So we can look at a few things there, and we can come up with some wee rules. When a is greater than 1, so when a is greater than 1, then the graph is stretched in the y direction, the y-axis direction, vertically essentially. It's been stretched vertically, which is the y direction, when a is greater than 1. When a is between 0 and 1, that's this one here, half is between 0 and 1, then the graph, still affected in the vertical direction, is compressed. We say it's compressed. It's got smaller, and it's in the y direction, the y-axis direction. So hopefully that's quite easy to see there. I've only done a couple of examples, but you get the idea. So the A affects the vertical height or the y direction, and if it's greater than 1, it stretches it and it gets bigger. If it's between 0 and 1, then it compresses it and it gets smaller. Now let's look at the last graph that we've got there. A was less than 0, so it was negative. And we see it's got the same basic shape, still repeats itself every 360, but it starts off being positive for the standard graph. But in this one here, it starts off and it's going negative and then positive. It's been flipped to the x-axis. So when A is when A is less than 0, it flips the graph in the x-axis, or the horizontal axis if you want to call it that. So it's been flipped, and because it's -3, or i.e. it's bigger than 1 in terms of the size of it, then it stretches. So it does what it does here, it still stretches in the y direction. So it flips the graph in the x-axis, and then because it's -3 and +3, then stretches. It stretches in the y-axis direction. And that's what you have to know. Okay, 3 things there that what the A effect has to it. Now it can be any letter, but I've chosen A. A is very common, you'll see that in textbooks. So you need to learn that A greater than 1 stretches in the vertical direction, the y-axis direction. Between 0 and 1, it compresses it and vertically. And when A is less than 0, it flips it in the x-axis, and then depending on the magnitude of the value, then it stretches it in the y direction. But remember, if A was -1/2, it would compress it. So because if it was -1/2, it would only go to here, be still flipped, but it would be smaller than 1, therefore it would compress it. Okay, so there's the rules you have to know. In the course graph, it's exactly the same idea. It's a different shape of graph, but these rules apply, and as I say, they apply to any graph, so it doesn't have to be a course graph. So I'm just going to do a couple of them. So let's get a standard course graph. A standard course graph goes down to 90 degrees 0 and then -1. That's probably a wee bit too small. So let me just extend that a wee bit. -1, then goes back to 0 at 270, then it goes back to 1 at 360. So that's a rough shape of the course graph. So that's y equals cos x, because if we make that 1 and -1, that's the graph. Now let's take a couple of values for A, and we already know the rules now, so these rules here, I'll just box them. These rules apply. Okay, so let's just make y equals, let's make it, I don't know, we'll make it 4 cos x. So if I have to draw that, if I'm asked to draw that, well, in the exam, I would just go down to 0, it's quite big, back to 270, and back up to 360. So it'll be roughly that. And then I have to put 4 here, and -4, and that's the minimum value here, and the maximum value because E is 4. So that'll be that. So let's try one that's a negative 2 cos x. So this one, negative 2 cos x, tells me that I need to flip that graph. So we're going to go from here. So we're flipping it. That should be 90 degrees. Just let me try and get that. And up to here. Then down to 0. You can see that they're quite hard to sketch. And then back to 1. So it's something like that. And because it's negative 2, the value along here would be 2. And the minimum value is minus 2. Okay, and the last one that I'll do is, I think I'll do y equals minus a third cos x. So again, it's a negative one. So we have to start here, and it's only a third, so it's quite small. So it'll go something like that, up to about here, and back down to 0, and then back along to here. So it's been compressed now. That's supposed to be a cos graph there. A little bit rough, but there we go. And the maximum value and minimum value would be a third and minus a third. And it's been flipped because of the negative sign. Negative sign here, but it's also been compressed because it's only a third. The A value is between 0 and 1, so it's compressed. Compressed for this one here. Okay. And that's all there is to that. Now, in the next video, we're going to look at when there's a value in here, and it's not just x, one call it bx, and we'll see what that does to. That'll be the next video. Okay, this comes up a lot at National 5, only for a few marks, maybe 2 marks or so, sometimes maximum of 3. So it's well worth knowing, and it's actually very easy. Learn the rules, learn the basic shapes, the general shape of the sine and cos, and then when we put the A into it and the B into it, that we'll do in the next video, then it just does slightly different things to it. Okay, that's us.